Yeah.
We can't.
this day we are together again. I will pull you in close like a hoop with the wind. On this day we are together again. We will share the same table again. We will share the same table again. I will pass you the salt, candlelight will bend. We will eat at the table again. To the healers that keep us alive, to the healers that keep us alive. Oh, I toast you your courage, knowledge and love, to the healers that keep us alive. On this day we are together again. On this day we are together again. I will pull you in close like a hoop with no end. On this day we are together again.
I'm glad you're here. You may not want to be here. You may long for your pew in our beautiful sanctuary next door, for the peace that settles over you when you settle into that familiar spot, for the people you see all around you in that beloved space, and for the ones you see in your memory when you settle into that familiar spot in that beloved space. I long for all of that too, both for you and for me. But I am still glad you're here. Glad that you've chosen again to tend to your spirit in this time and in this way, even while longing for another way in a time yet to come. So come, let's worship together. I'll now do our chalice lighting. And, this week, some of my colleagues and I were chatting about the live Zoom versus taping the service ahead of time and editing out anything that might go wrong. And I said, I love live worship because it embraces the imperfection in, humanity. And we've got a bit of imperfection here this morning. I lit the chalice and did not light the candles. So the chalice lighting will be my lighting the candles since I've already lit the chalice. And I'll say those familiar words that we love to hear. Let these flames be to us the symbol of the wholeness we seek, their brightness dispelling gloom and lighting the path to faith and hope, their glow reminding us of the sacred bonds that link us to all living things, their radiance calling us to cast the light of freedom, justice, and peace upon all the world. So welcome, my friends. Welcome again to another Sunday worship here at First Parish Church. And as we've been doing, Dustin, if you would go to gallery, I invite you all to say hello to your neighbors, unmute yourselves, and let's spend a hearty minute or two saying hi to one another.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you all.
Good morning, morning.
David and Rose.
Everybody.
Seeing you all again.
Hello, everybody.
Work on the auction.
Happy birthday, Kathy Bray.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Oh, there she is.
Where's the birthday?
Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Ellen.
Happy birthday, Marianne.
Thank you. It's belated.
A little belated. Too much.
All right. I'm grateful.
Well, we're going to give you birthday people a gift. We are not going to sing to you over Zoom because it sounds horrible, but we wish you well. Birthday wishes to sounds like Kathy Bray and Marianne Kaufman. So we have a fun service here today. We're kind of gathering up this past year. We are just about ready to celebrate our first anniversary being apart, staying together while being apart. And we'll have speakers. Sherry Gardner will talk about pastoral care. Michael Gardner will talk about worship. And Jim Hamilton, our governing board president, will talk about the church in general. But before we begin to gather up the last year and look forward to what's to come, we need to stop and acknowledge the milestone of reaching 500,000 deaths, COVID deaths here in America. You know, when I heard the number 500,000, it was kind of the same a few days before the number of 1.9 trillion for the new assistance package that's been passed by the House of Representatives and Congress. And, you know, 1.9 trillion, that's a big number. And when in today's world, somehow these big numbers, they really get meaningless to some degree. So 500,000 deaths, at first I said, well, 500,000, that's just awful. And then I started thinking about 500,000 individuals, 500,000 people. And I've told you all over the course of this year about our daughter, Carolyn. She's a doctor, an ICU doctor in Los Angeles, and has been handling COVID patients since the beginning of the pandemic, and has personally probably witnessed hundreds and hundreds of deaths of her patients. So I texted Carolyn because you never can really get to talk to Carolyn these days. She's pretty busy. And I said, I would love for you to offer us the story of one of the patients that you find most difficult to remember. And give me just a sentence or two. And knowing Carolyn, I figured I wouldn't get much more than a sentence or two. That's just kind of the way she operates. She's matter of fact, but I'm sure that there were some patients that really touched her heart. So I was pretty stunned when this is what she gave me. I'm going to read the story to you, and it's much more than a sentence or two. And this is just one story, one of the 500,000. So after I finish telling you this person's story, we are going to share a moment of silence together, and we are going to think about all the 500,000 stories just like this one. So these are our daughter, Carolyn, Dr. Carolyn's words. In March of last year, at the very beginning of the pandemic, a 29-year-old man was brought to the hospital by his wife. He had been coughing for a week or so and had seen his primary care doctor. At that time, not every cough was thought to be due to COVID, so the young man was sent home with some antibiotics for a presumed bacterial pneumonia. A few days later, he showed up at our ER with difficulty breathing. Since it was clear that the young man required oxygen, he was admitted to the hospital. The hospital had recently enacted a strict no visitor policy, and so he was taken upstairs all alone. After being on the wards for one day, He was moved to my ICU due to difficulty in breathing. My team was on call that weekend in the ICU. My team was surprised at how young he was and the fact that he seemed so healthy. He had a history of very mild asthma as a child, and he was just 10 or 20 pounds overweight, but otherwise that was it. Often in the ICU, we take care of patients who are elderly or perhaps unlucky enough to have some type of serious chronic medical condition. This man was unusual. He was young and fairly healthy, not unlike the group of my interns and my residents who were taking care of him. Shortly after arriving in our ICU, he had profound difficulty breathing, and he was placed on a mechanical ventilator. We also discovered around that time that he had COVID. It seems strange now how long this took, given how readily rapid testing is now available. But almost a year ago, we did not have access to quick testing, even in the hospital. Because of his positive COVID result, we reached out to the infectious disease specialists. In hindsight, they didn't really know how to treat this disease. None of us did back then. We used medications that physiologically seemed like they might work. We weighed the risks and benefits of various therapies and ultimately used whatever was recommended at the time by our colleagues and consultants. Unfortunately, treatment that we now know is effective for critically ill COVID patients was not widely used at that time. Once he was on the ventilator, the young man was heavily sedated and put into a medically induced coma. He was given medications that induced paralysis in his body so the ventilator could take over his breathing. He was also proned each day. Proning is where a team of nurses places the patient on their abdomen for up to 16 hours at a time. It requires a great deal of coordinated effort, but really helps the sickest patients maintain higher oxygen levels. One day, early in his ICU stay, I entered his room to perform several procedures. I placed a catheter into his artery to monitor his blood pressure, and one into his vein to deliver caustic medications. I looked at his chart and discovered that that day was his 30th birthday. For the next week or so, he carried on like this, sedated, paralyzed, and proned. Meanwhile, several other specialists were consulted for various medical problems that were developing. None would enter the room to examine him. Our ICU team was frustrated about this, but at that time it was basically the norm. Many colleagues argued that this was appropriate as it minimized exposure to a disease we knew very little about back then. Some argued it placed an undue burden on certain providers like the ICU docs and nurses. And most of all, it reduced the medical care a patient would receive. Fortunately, times have changed. Also during this time, family was not allowed to visit. It was hard for family to understand what was happening. They were mainly updated by the bedside nurses, with doctors providing some brief updates every day. In our ICU at the time, we hadn't yet developed those creative solutions to allow communications, like setting up iPads on tables in the rooms so families could watch their loved ones while they were on the ventilator or while the team was performing its morning rounds. Exactly 1 week after arriving in the ICU, while being flipped onto his belly, this young man's blood pressure dropped and his heart stopped. Despite pushing on his chest and delivering medications to restart his heart, he ultimately passed away from COVID-19 at the age of 30. A few hours after he died, I arrived for my night shift. I noticed that my team was grief-stricken. Deaths from COVID were new and shocking. They explained what happened and wondered what they could have done differently. I think it was the unknown of the disease and the loneliness of the patient that hurt the providers the most. It's hard to even allow myself to think about how it must have felt for his family. They were informed of his passing, of course. They asked for a viewing at that time, but the hospital denied their request. Looking back, this case still makes me feel sad. But for me, one of the saddest parts of all of this is how rote COVID-19 deaths eventually became. And patients still remain very, very lonely in their journey. And that has not changed. And honestly, I couldn't tell you anything particularly special about this patient. I never heard his voice. I never learned any personal facts about him outside of what was written in his chart. I do know he had loved ones. He had a wife and parents and a brother. What struck with me the most about this case, or rather this patient, is that I, a complete stranger, was one of the few people with whom he spent his final birthday, that milestone birthday of turning 30 years old. Let's share a moment of silence for the 500,000 stories just like this one.
Hi, I'm Sherry Gardner and a member of the Pastoral Care Committee here at First Parish. Before the pandemic, I really thought I understood the value of community and the culture of connection, but I think I actually had to live through what has been happening with this pandemic to realize that for me, being a part of First Parish has come to redefine what it really means to be a part of a beloved community. Like many of us, I began to process pandemic losses, like not being able to be with our family and friends. I made calls and wrote to those I hadn't seen in a long time, just to see if they were okay. And also, since I couldn't be with my granddaughters, I figured out a way to be with them by watching some of their TV series and texting and FaceTiming them about those shows. And that was great fun. And maybe, though, the beginning of my understanding that I did need to devise new ways to connect with those I love. And I think that is what we are doing here at First Parish, finding ways not to just maintain our connections, but also inventing new and sometimes better ways to share and enrich our community. For example, the Pastoral Care Committee came up with an expanded list, in addition to those we regularly contact, of church members who are not on committees or who might not know all that First Parish is offering during this pandemic. So we began to reach out with cards and calls to these people too. All of these contacts are a joy. When I first started my calls, I actually met people I didn't know at all. And now I have delightful calls with many people on a regular basis. In a way, I think that our pre-pandemic in-church coffee hour doesn't always allow. Some of these people are isolated, some not, but we just chat about what is going on in their lives and the trials and the joys. Being in touch with these church members, I even renewed a friendship with a friend who had taught church school with me for many years. She doesn't attend church much anymore, but it is so much fun to chat about our children, 40 years older than they were when we were first teaching together. Her youngest just adopted a baby, and I knew her when she was an infant. And she wanted me to know that when she was 6 years old, she learned that our family had adopted 2 children as a way, and that was the first time she had ever known of adoption as a way to grow the family. And she said this understanding at 6 has now changed her family's life forever. And I wouldn't have known this had not the Pastoral Care Committee updated their outreach list in response to the pandemic. I am so grateful to be a part of this committee. And now I have gained a new and deeper appreciation of what beloved community really means. It's a gift. My sister cross-stitched this saying for me. She said, "Life is full of joys and sorrows, but always remember, just because we have one does not mean we cannot have the other." And during this pandemic, our beloved community is proving this true in so many ways. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Gardner, and I'm here today as the chair of the Worship and Music Committee. A really great privilege to have that job in a time when worship has become so different and so challenging. And I'm grateful to all of the people who helped give us that opportunity, and also so grateful to Carol Robison, who's the vice chair, and the other members of the committee who've worked closely with Catherine over the last year to try to make our different worship services as meaningful and as interesting and as helpful to people as we can possibly make them. As Catherine said this morning in starting the service, we very much appreciate your attendance and participation in these services. We keep a count every week of how many people are here. There are 2 or 3 counters who are going through all the boxes as we speak, and we make note when there's more than one person in the box so we can get the numbers as accurately as we can. And when you're here, it's like an affirmation to us that we are doing something to deliver a service and an experience that is meaningful to you and can help you with your spiritual lives. We've been working hard to sort of vary the tone and the content of the services, and Carol Robison is spearheading the diverse music task force, which is trying to also introduce new music to the services to make them as interesting and inspiring as they can possibly be. We've experimented with live services in the eventides in the fall when the weather allowed. We've had the hybrid services for Christmas Eve, where we could actually bring the organ experience via Zoom, and we hope to do that in the future. This on March the 17th, there will be an evensong with a celebration of a Celtic spring. It will not include any live attendance, but it will give all of you the chance to hear the organ played in the sanctuary again, with the hope that when the weather improves and perhaps we get some better news on trends, we'll be able to switch back to the eventide services, which would allow people into the service itself. On April the 1st, we are going to have our first ever streamed Maundy Thursday service. This is a communion service typically held in the chapel. We've had sometimes as many as 15, 16, sometimes as many as 7 or 8 attending that service. I've always thought of it as one of the great unappreciated secrets of our services here. It's a different kind of service. Last year we didn't have the courage to do it on Zoom. Now we think we know enough that we might be able to deliver a meaningful service to you. And I hope that you will take the opportunity to explore it. It's a communion service, it's called that, but my view of it is that it's really more Buddhist than anything else. And one of the highlights is that we honor the contributions of working men and women from all kinds of occupations and tasks throughout the world. And it's quite different, and now you can have the opportunity to do it. There'll be more details coming out later, but I hope that you will consider giving it a try. It's like one of the maybe few benefits of the Zoom experience is that we were able to set record-breaking trends in attendance at fishermen services pretty much all summer long. Many more people experienced those services this summer than have ever done on the patio. And then the sharing service that we have between Christmas and New Year's also broke all of our attendance records. So that's some small consolation, and we hope that when we're back to more regularized services, the taste of services like that will encourage you to give them a try in person. For Easter, we're going to have a live sunrise service on the beach. Because it is a worship service, the state requires us to have pre-registration, so we have a list of all the attendees if we need to do any contact tracing subsequently. And the Easter service itself will be a hybrid It will be Zoomed from the sanctuary, but a limited number of people will be allowed to attend in person. So please consider that. And if you'd like to attend, you should register as early as you can. Going forward, I'm reminded of a sign on the Marshfield Fairgrounds as you head north out of Marshfield Center. Typically at this time of year, that sign would announce the dates in August of the upcoming Marshfield Fair. This year, all it says is cross your fingers. And that's sort of where we are with respect to what services will be like going into the spring and the summer. We're going to be working closely with the Safe Congregations Committee and to coordinate with them about what they feel we can comfortably do. Our plans for fishermen's services are uncertain, but we certainly hope that we will be able to have some live services there this summer, including maybe setting up chairs out on the front lawn so we can accommodate more people with appropriate space than is possible on the patio. In the fall, we are hoping for a combination of both live and stream service, the kind of hybrid services we've had. And this is really with the idea of inclusion. We understand that even if we are able to go back to live services with substantially more attendance on them, there will be people who just are either unable or don't feel comfortable in attending services in person yet. And so we don't want to deny them access. And so we will be working to try to have that kind of hybrid going forward in the fall. Unfortunately, there are logistical and technical issues which make it really hard to have that kind of service on a sustained basis. So we're going to have to make some modifications to the sanctuary so that we can have streaming with people and with the organ on a easier and less expensive basis. But of course, all of this depends quite a bit on what the virus has in mind for us going forward. But hopefully we can all feel and actually be safer then. So please know, no matter what the medical circumstances, Catherine and the Worship and Music Committee will be working hard to try to make the services as useful and meaningful and spiritual as we can. We truly, truly thank you for your support during this time. And if you've got any questions or concerns, please be in touch with me or Carol or any of the members of the Worship and Music Committee. If there's anything we can do to make your spiritual life here more satisfying. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much, and Sherry too. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about Beloved Community from the perspective of your governing board. I am your governing board president. I have been since you elected me at the annual program meeting in June. Now, each president at First Parish has challenges, but this year I was lucky to be able to follow the lead of past President Mary Flanagan, whose leadership during the first few months of the pandemic was important in providing a steady hand, a strong knowledge of church affairs, and the ability to adjust to trying circumstances. Thank you, Mary, and also to our staff who pivoted so quickly to address the constraints of the pandemic. I should also mention the expanded role of our Safe Congregations Committee, whose work around pandemic issues has been critical to our understanding of how to operate during the COVID-19 outbreak. This is how a beloved community reacts to adversity. And one of the things that happened in my first days as president was the church's vote to put up the Black Lives Matter banner. It seems like years ago now, but the special meeting vote was just last June. The banner went up over the summer and the dedication ceremony was in September. Since then, the Racial Justice Working Group has taken on the role begun by the Racial Justice Task Force And you can see their activities in multiple ways, including the recent Reading with a Purpose discussion on Isabella Walker's book, Cast. Now, this is how a beloved community educates itself in turbulent times. One of the things that became clear early on in my presidency was that our traditional and very effective fundraisers, like the summer fair, the holiday fair, and the service auction, would not be able to take place in their normal fashion. The governing board formed a pandemic fundraising working group that includes me, Jay Bray, Sharon Nabreski, Pat Slechta, and Tracy Wagner. As our annual budget for the 2020-2021 church year was being formed, we committed to raising $15,000 through alternative fundraisers. We've had two of them so far. One, the Creativity Virtual Auction that's just wrapped up, and the other, our Fun Fall Virtual Auction. If I may make a quick announcement about the Creativity Virtual Auction, if you look at the auction website, you might think we didn't quite reach our goal. I'm very happy to announce that with donations that have come outside of the website, we will exceed our goal. So thank you so much to everyone who donated, to everyone who bid. If you want a particular item, you should have received an email about that. You can always check the auction website as well. And over the next day or two, I will be connecting donors and winners via email. So again, many, many thanks. Because of this, we're making good progress towards our fundraising goal and showing how a beloved community can reimagine itself and its activities. The generosity of our members and friends is a constant source of amazement. This year, one outstanding example is the generous bequest that we received from Linda Miller's estate. Her family's intent is that we use Linda's bequest to improve accessibility to the church. And when you stop by the church next time, you'll see the impact of some improvements we've made, specifically to the ramp out back. Now, we've got bigger plans in motion to improve the front steps, which I know is a big issue for many folks, but those will take some additional planning to achieve. So stay tuned. Another example of beloved community at work. At the beginning of the church year, the governing board goes on a retreat, part of which is dedicated to creating a covenant and a set of goals. We did this virtually in 2 sessions in August. Now, a covenant is basically our promise of how to treat each other during the coming year. It involves things like coming to meetings on time, listening to each other, and trusting each other's motivations. We've also adopted some advice from a 20th century congregational minister named Stoddard Lane, who said, "We agree to differ, we resolve to love, we unite to serve." Now, this is how beloved community governs. You know already about some of the goals that the governing board set for itself, such as forming a pandemic fundraising working group and committing to support the racial justice working group. But there's one other that we had gotten started on in the previous church year, but which we had to set aside due to the pandemic. That is the Envisioning the Sanctuary in the 21st Century initiative. Do you remember that? Here's a part of the description that the governing board assigned to this task. So I quote, "The Envisioning Our Meeting House in the 21st Century Task Force will establish and conduct a process whereby the entire church membership can engage in discernment about the appearance of the meeting house interior, focusing on the area behind the pulpit. Included will be consideration of the 2 large tablets mounted on the wall behind the pulpit, the wood cornice, which has text on it, and the possible incorporation of Unitarian Universalist religious symbols." So that's the key part of this. And when we started on this envisioning process, I think we were mostly looking back, trying to imagine how our history related to who we are today in the present. With the pandemic, the future aspect of this has taken on even greater importance in our beloved community. So next, what does our beloved community look like once many people are vaccinated and the pandemic is under control? It truly opens up a range of questions that we'll seek to answer moving forward. As Michael said, what will worship services look like? What role will remote viewing options play? What about committee meetings and other activities? What activities should be in person? Which one's remote? Which one's hybrid? Can we have a summer fair this year? If so, what will it look like? As much as we might like to, we're not going to be able to go back to life as it was. The first thing you may notice upon returning to church is that the parlor has gone through a full renovation, a huge project that would not have been possible without the work of our Buildings and Grounds Committee and the commitment and financial support of our alliance. You're going to love the newly renovated parlor. This project is just another example of the strengths and talents of our beloved community. I'm confident that we can rise to the challenges that face us. It will happen through shared responsibility, people stepping up to help, with each of us offering the gift of our talents. In short, that's beloved community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry and Michael and Jim, for talking about how well we've done staying together as beloved community during this year of the pandemic. And I have just a few things to say about spiritual growth during this year. My questions are, what will be left? When we are done with this thing, what will be left? What will we do when we're done with this thing? Will we still be kind? Will we continue to smile and wave at people we don't really know? Will we still be our brothers and sisters' keepers? Will we still make things for people that we'll never even meet? Will we draw hearts and write kind messages on the sidewalks? Will we work more from home? Will we spend more time with our kids and our parents? Will we spend more time with ourselves? Will we remember what it feels like to be vulnerable and afraid? And will this feeling continue to fuel our newly inflamed passion for racial equity and inclusion? Will we remember those moments across the globe when we realized that we really were facing a common enemy? When we realized that we really do need one another to survive? And will we use the spirit of cooperation to tackle other common enemies like climate change? This pandemic has given us the blessing and the challenge of time. We can cringe and cower and hoard and complain. We can raise our fists and curse the inconvenience of it all. Or we can study the lessons that are laid out before us and carry them with us into a brighter, more kind tomorrow. What will it be, my spiritual friends, when this is all over? In the mid-1940s, as World War II was ending, the great leader Winston Churchill said to his people, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Well, my friends, the COVID-19 pandemic is indeed a good crisis, a crisis of unimaginable magnitude. COVID-19 has inflicted incalculable social, economic, and structural damage and has caused more deaths than we ever could have imagined possible at this time last year. Think about it. We are the lucky ones, unlike that young 30-year-old man that Dr. Carolyn remembers. We're surviving the pandemic. And yet we think about how COVID has dramatically changed our personal lives. If you're like me, there are beloveds in your family, like my Carolyn and her little boy Noah, that you have not seen or hugged in over a year. Think about how the pandemic has dramatically changed our shared life here at First Parish. You've heard lots of this from Sherry and Michael and Jim. I remember a few weeks into the pandemic, there was this local photographer, and he asked me to pose for a photo. And he chose a gray morning. I guess photographers like the grayness of light. And I met him here at the church, and I climbed up into the choir loft, and he had me look out one of the windows, one of those beautiful windows at the top of our choir loft. And I was holding this sign in my hands, and the sign said, "The church has left the building." And that's exactly what happened. Our church, our beloved First Parish community, has not been together for nearly 1 year. For the past year, as you've heard, we've been learning how to do church in this moment of social distancing. We've been learning how we can care for one another. We've been learning about how much this church means to us and how much we mean to each other. Since last March, Lenore has generally been folding the bell ringers all alone every month. But last Thursday, she put out a call for some helpers. And with several of us having been vaccinated and beginning to feel a little more comfortable about doing things outside our homes, 5 of us showed up to fold bell ringers. We sat in the Harvey Assembly Hall, socially distanced with masks on, folding the bell ringers that you'll receive probably in tomorrow's mail. And boy, I can tell you, did it feel good. Intimations of things to come. Now, with the approval of even a 3rd vaccine, your Safe Congregations team is beginning to consider what re-entry next fall might look like. The day when we're together again is becoming more and more a reality. And so, my spiritual friends, how are we going to make sure that we don't waste this good crisis that we're all going through? Jack Hill and I have been teaching a class on the Hebrew Bible. We won't get to the book of Leviticus, but there've always been this special teaching in chapter 25 of Leviticus that calls to my heart. That's the chapter where the Hebrew tribes people are newly settled in the land that Yahweh promised them. And then they're given some guidelines for the ways that they are supposed to live in the promised land. A Sabbath day of rest must be observed each week. The land must be given a Sabbath year of rest every 7th year. And when 7 times 7 years have been completed, in the 50th year, there must be declared what's called a Jubilee year, a time of radical realignment. The Jubilee was announced by the blowing of the shofar, the ram's horn, the sound of that horn, a wake-up call. The Jubilee tradition outlined in Leviticus says that once every 50 years, the people shall stop. Debts will be canceled, slaves will be freed, people return to their ancestral homes, the land itself is given a chance to rest, the poor will be lifted up, the lost will be reintegrated, creation is given a moment to breathe, and the birthright of future generations is considered. Many biblical scholars question whether the nation of Israel ever really managed to mark a Jubilee year in this way. But these passages from Leviticus offer humanity an ideal, an aspiration. My spiritual friends, in so many ways, this past year has been a Jubilee year for each one of us, for our church, and for the world. This year's been an opportunity for rest and reflection, for re-engaging what is really important to us in our lives. And the vulnerability we've experienced this year has been an encouragement to strive towards greater equality in a world society that's so very unjust. The poet Rumi writes, "The wound is the place where the light enters in. The wound is the place where the light enters you." And any chance at healing always begins with acknowledging that there is indeed a wound. And sometimes this is hard for the individual, and usually it's even harder for a nation. But my friends, this Jubilee year has shown us all that our nation needs a reorientation, a new path. In this Jubilee year, we're asking some pretty big questions. How do we reorient the way we practice our policing? How do we care for the health of people now and into the future? How do we correct inherent bias in the systems and structures in our country? And on a more personal note, how do we stay connected to what is going on in the world without hurting so much all the time? What am I called to do and to be in this world, in this moment? In this moment when we love rather than what we fear has come into sharper focus. This moment, this Jubilee time, this holy interval when rest and renewal fuel the next stage of human history. My spiritual friends, the big question for us is this: will we waste this good crisis? What will we do when we're done with this? Will we still be kind? Will we still smile and wave at people we don't know? Will we still be our brothers and sisters' keepers? Will we still make things for people we don't even know and never will ever meet? Will we work more from home and spend more time with our kids? Will we spend more time with ourselves? Will we remember what it feels like to be vulnerable and afraid? And will this feeling continue to fuel our passion for racial equity and inclusion? Will we remember those moments across the globe when we realize that we are facing many common enemies and that we do need one another to survive? My spiritual friends, the invitation this morning is this: let's not waste this good crisis. After all we have been through, and in the memory of over 500,000 beloveds like Dr. Carolyn's 30-year-old patient, let's vow not to waste this good crisis. From our lips to God's ears, amen.
Hold on, we just have to hold on. You don't have to cry, not tonight. I know lately everything seems crazy. People walking by, just getting by. I just wanna rest my head and lay down with roses on our bed. They say heaven can wait. You and I will survive. Sometimes we're lost and astray, and we hope far away. Hold the line, we'll survive. So just smile through the rain, through the heartache and pain. Hold the line, we'll survive, we'll survive. Hold the line, hold the line. Slow down, you just have to slow down. There's nothing going fast, way too fast. Another great day, Technicolor, save me, paint it in the sky. We're alive, and I just wanna rest my hand say heaven can wait. You and I will survive. Sometime we're lost and astray, and we're home far away. Hold the line, we'll survive. Let's just smile through the rain, through the heartache and pain. Hold the line, we'll survive. We'll survive. La la la, la 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 la. Hold the line, and I just wanna rest my head and lay down with roses in our bed. They say heaven can wait. We'll survive. Sometimes we're lost and stray, and we hope far away. Hold the line, we'll survive. Let's just smile through the rain, through the heartache and pain. Hold the line, we'll survive. We'll survive. Hold the line, we'll survive. We'll survive.
Until we meet again, may you be blessed. Now go be a blessing to the world. Hang around, enjoy some coffee hour. You bring the coffee, we'll bring the fellowship. See you in the breakout rooms.